When King David founded this shining city on a hill more than 3,000 years ago, and his son King Solomon built the first temple here, they unified in one place the spiritual and political capitals of the Jewish people. You and I are blessed to be alive at the third time in history when that unity has been realized in Jerusalem, and it is a blessing we would not be enjoying today without the vision and courage of Theodor Herzl. And obviously I extend that to all the other Zionist pioneers who followed him and turned his dream into the magnificent reality that Israel is today. The Hasidic master Baal Shem Tov said that the difference between a miracle and a natural event is only in their frequency. Almost 2,000 years passed between the destruction of the Second Temple and the reestablishment of the State of Israel in 1948, so I think we can safely say that modern Israel is a miracle. In fact, if you look into Webster's dictionary, and now this is something that existed before Google and Wikipedia, there was a thing called the Webster, Stanley Fisher, you remember this, yes. So, anyway, Webster's defines a miracle as an event that is so unnatural it suggests divine involvement. This is the secular wordsmiths at Webster. Of course, I agree. I am sure that there was divine involvement in the reestablishment of the State of Israel, but I also know, as you do, that it would never have happened without the initiative and leadership of men and women who, like Herzl, stepped out of the passive crowd to act to change history. That is, after all, the paradigmatic relationship between God and man in the Torah, going back to Abraham, but I think most powerfully in that great moment at the Yam Suf at the Red Sea when Bnei Israel is trapped between the water and Pharaoh's oncoming army. The people panic. They plead to Moshe, and Moshe prays to God for a miracle. But God essentially says, in my translation, this is not the time for prayer. This is now the time for action. And he directs Moshe to hold up his staff, which he does. But it is Nachshon of the tribe of Judah, as you know, in a supreme act of faith and courage and commitment, who walks into the Yam Suf, and then and only then did the waters separate to allow Bnei Israel to walk through. The rest, as they say, is history. Theodor Herzl was the Nachshon of our time, and he was followed by other Nachshons, other heroes like Weizmann, Jabotinsky, Ben-Gurion, Begin Meir, and so many others, and Christian Nachshons, if I can put it that way, like Balfour, Churchill, and Truman right up to this day, who have enabled, sustained, and strengthened the miracle of modern Israel. And now I speak as a Zionist American, speaking from that perspective, to say what a great reality the succeeding generations of Israelis have made of Herzl's vision. As Dr. Levy said, and I agree with him, the vision has not been perfectly realized, but a lot of it has. Look around you here in Israel as frequent visitors like Hadassah and I do, and we see a thrillingly diverse people, realizing the prophet's vision of an ingathering of Jews from the four corners of the world, a vision that Jews prayed for every day for centuries, and then Herzl acted. Modern Israel's diverse population, as you know, speaks the same language, Hebrew, a language that was long thought to be dead. As far as anybody knows, this is the first time a language has literally been reincarnated, and all the better by a nation restoring its sovereignty and its ancestral homeland. What else do we see as visitors? Here we see a world-class economy ripe with globally significant innovation and entrepreneurship, and may I say, a rather superb banking sector as well. Just thanking our host. Israeli culture is also unique, rich, and diverse, producing movies and television shows, I can tell you, from the American perspective, that now draw not just audiences, but cultish audiences in America and throughout the world, thanks to Netflix. When it comes to religious observance in this Jewish state, there are, as Dr. Levy said, still not only differences, but damaging disputes. And I'm going to return to that subject in a few moments when I discuss Herzl's vision. But for now, let me say, from the perspective of someone visiting from Chutz La'aretz, it seems to me that there are remarkable ways in which the traditions and values of Judaism pervade this country in a way not found anywhere else in the world. From the quiet that prevails on all the streets of Israel on Yom Kippur, to the large percentage of Israelis who describe themselves as secular and celebrate Shabbat in some way, in their own way. And if I may, to the small but significant fact that Israel is the only country in the world where the glue on the back of postage stamps is certified as kosher. In America, we would say only in America. I'd say only in Israel. There is, in other words, a unifying baseline Jewish consensus in Israel beneath the surface controversies as real as they are. As a nation located in a neighborhood that has been hostile, Israel has had to develop its own defenses, and it has done a brilliant job at that. The soldiers of the IDF are patriotic, courageous, and effective. The military hardware and software made here that are used by the IDF are also desired by militaries around the world. As Prime Minister Netanyahu said a few years ago, and I quote, "We are no longer scattered among the nations, powerless to defend ourselves. For the first time in 100 generations, we, the Jewish people, can defend ourselves." Thank God, and thank the IDF. Now, I will tell you that those have been our views of Israel for a long time. Growing up in a Zionist family in America, spending 24 years, privileged to be a pro-Israel member of the U.S. Senate, but now Hadassah and I have a new status. We are parents and grandparents of children who have made Aliyah. Yeah. Our oldest granddaughter Nessia, in February of last year, and our daughter Hani, her husband Daniel, and their 4 sons in July of last year. And as a bonus for us and Israel, a little more than a month ago, on September 20th of this year, right here in Jerusalem at Hadassah Hospital, Hani gave birth to her 5th son, Shlomo. Yeah, you will not be surprised to hear that Hadassah and I are visiting Israel more frequently these days. And when we do, I must tell you, a popular American phrase runs regularly through my head and my heart. We are living the dream. We are living the dream, and it is Herzl's dream that we are living. When Herzl made this dream his life's cause in the last decade of the 19th century, he knew it was not a new dream. As he himself wrote, the idea that I have developed is a very old one. It is the restoration of the Jewish state. He knew that in his time there already were Zionists, for instance. He knew that the Jewish state idea goes back as long as Hashem's Brit with Abraham and also God's directives to Moshe about where to lead the Jewish people after liberation from Egypt and a significant stop at Har Sinai. But there were also many Zionists who preceded Herzl in his time, rabbis like Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer, and great lay leaders like Yehuda Leib Pinsker and the Chovevei Tzion movement he founded. But Herzl was the one who changed history. I asked myself in preparing for tonight, why? How? Clearly, part of it was what the environment of his day was, the rising anti-Semitism, culminating in the dreadful Dreyfus trial in France, which, as you know, Herzl covered it as a correspondent for a Viennese newspaper. And he saw and heard anti-Semitic mobs in Paris chanting, "Death to the Jews." It was these personal experiences, Herzl said, that made him into a Zionist. But what made him the founder of modern Zionism was the power of his pen and the courage of his actions and leadership. As you know, he founded the World Zionist Organization and tirelessly advocated, lobbied for his cause in the capitals of the world. That's why I say Theodor Herzl was the Nachshon of the modern Jewish world. In preparing for this evening's discussion, so that I would better understand Herzl's vision, I went back and read over his writings, including his two great Zionist texts, books, Der Judenstaat and Alt Neue Land. And as I read, I kept thinking of what someone said of Winston Churchill after the Second World War, which was that Churchill took the English language into battle. In a similar way, Herzl took first the German language and then all the other languages into which his writing were translated into the political and diplomatic struggles against anti-Semitism and for the security of the Jewish people in a new state of their own. In Der Judenstaat, he argued that the Jewish people should leave Europe for Palestine, their historic homeland. He said the Jews possess a nationality, but not a nation. Listen to his words. They're really moving. We have sincerely tried everything to merge with national communities in which we live, seeking only to preserve the faith of our fathers. It is not permitted us. In vain are we loyal patriots, sometimes super loyal. In vain do we make the same sacrifices of life and property as our fellow citizens. In vain do we strive to enhance the fame of our native lands in the arts and sciences or her wealth by trade and commerce. In our native lands where we have lived for centuries, we are still described as aliens, often by men whose ancestors had not yet come at a time when Jewish sighs had long been heard in the country. And then he added, oppression and persecution cannot exterminate us. No nation on earth has endured such struggles and sufferings as we have. Jew baiting has merely winnowed out our weaklings. The strong among us defiantly return to our own whenever persecution breaks out. That is why he argued for a Jewish state, by which he said was the only way Jews could free themselves from that hatred. He concludes that book with these words, I believe, and remember this is the end of the 19th century, I believe that a wondrous generation of Jews will spring into existence. The Maccabeans will rise again. The Jews who wish for a state will have it. We shall live at last as free men on our own soil and die peacefully in our own homes. The world will be freed by our liberty, enriched by our wealth, magnified by our greatness. And whatever we attempt there to accomplish for our own welfare will react powerfully and beneficially for the good of humanity. Those are stirring words, all the more so because they were both Jewish-centered and universal, and the ways in which they are prophetic are really striking. Herzl's last literary work was a short novel about Zionism, which he perfectly titled Alt Nile Land, the Old New Land. It was, in essence, a detailed prediction and vision of what he hoped Israel would become. And let me just summarize it briefly. He envisioned a Jewish state that combined modern Jewish culture with the best of Europe's civilizational heritage. As you may know, and I was fascinated to be reminded, he predicted that he wanted a palace of peace to be built in Jerusalem to arbitrate international disputes. And he also foresaw the rebuilding of the temple, but on what one commentator artfully described as modern principles. Herzl portrayed a state in which most Jewish citizens were not religious, but there would be respect for religion in public as well as private places, and obviously respect for those who were not religious. He thought many languages, including Hebrew, would be spoken in this old new land, but did not foresee that Hebrew would be reborn and become the national language. And he also did not foresee, perhaps idealistically, perhaps naively, the conflict between Jews and Arabs. He assumed that the Arab inhabitants of this land would be grateful to their new Jewish neighbors for improving the economic conditions of Israel. Economically, Herzl foresaw the Jewish state becoming a kind of third way between capitalism and socialism. Now, I mention this not because I'm critical of Herzl or Israelis for the way in which the details of his Zionist dream have been realized. It's miraculous how much of the dream has been realized. It was a dream that became prophetic in the sense that the essence of it, the creation of the state, was realized. Nevertheless, the way in which the normative parts of Herzl's vision that I've just talked briefly about of the state have not been implemented yet in the 21st century, I think are worth exploring to see whether Israel should and can do more to implement Herzl's designs for religious freedom and inclusiveness, in which every Jew in this Jewish homeland feels that he or she have equal rights and equal responsibilities. To strive for better relations, certainly within Israel, between Arabs and Jews, and broader economic well-being. You have excellent speakers at this conference tomorrow who will talk in more detail about several of these subjects. As we look back 125 years to Herzl's original vision and compare it to the realities of today, we can never often enough say that his enormous achievement is that the Jewish state of his dreams is alive and well in the 21st century, and the rest is commentary. Now, I want to discuss Herzl's life briefly and work from my perspective as an American and an American Zionist. The first point is historical, but it remains relevant and important in America today. There were Zionists in America before Theodor Herzl. They were Christians. The founding generation of Americans were mostly Calvinists, and the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, was at the heart of their faith. Read some of their writings, and you will see that they are explicitly Zionistic. More than 200 years ago, our second president, John Quincy Adams, explicitly supported the restoration of the Jewish homeland in Israel. And as you probably know, but I mention it proudly as an American, in 1842, Joseph Smith, the founder of the Church of Latter-day Saints, known also as the Mormon Church, which is really America's only indigenous religion, sent an emissary, Orson Hyde, here to this land to pray for the return of the Jews to their homeland, for the rebuilding of the capital in Jerusalem, and believe it or not, for the rebuilding of the Beit Mikdash. So when Herzl wrote his Zionist treatise and organized the Zionist movement 125 years ago, there were Christian Zionists in America who were ready to become supporters. In the decades since then, their numbers have grown larger and more organized, led by the millions of Americans who now call themselves Christian evangelicals. Their support for Israel remains strong today and is critically important in America. As one of my Christian Zionist friends likes to remind me, there are millions more Christian Zionists in America than Jewish Zionists. I don't ever win that argument. Really, they deserve a round of applause. Baruch Hashem. Okay, from the beginning of the Zionist movement by Herzl, there were American Jews who were inspired and activated. Their numbers and intensity grew, of course, after the Shoah and contributed significantly to President Truman's all-important recognition of the State of Israel 11 minutes after Ben-Gurion declared independence in Tel Aviv in 1948. Something else happened to American Jews after 1948, I believe, and I don't know that I've ever really had the opportunity to say this publicly, and I hope Israelis appreciate it. I do. Israel's existence changed our self-image in America as Jews, particularly after the 1967 war. In America, Israel has given Jews more pride and self-confidence. Israel, in other words, is not just a post-Shoah sanctuary to go to in times of trouble. It has become a transformational role model for Jewish Americans who, in spite of all the freedom our country offered, still, for decades, felt they had to assimilate or lay low. That stopped after 1948. More Jews became activists in our society in all fields, including in politics. One might say that helped the Jewish American run for vice president of the United States in 2000 and get 500,000 more votes than the other candidate. Have I mentioned that before? They became activists, also proud activists in support of Israel, to produce a powerful, populist, bipartisan, as President Rivlin said, pro-Israel movement led by AIPAC, working with Christian evangelical groups like Christians United for Israel, and that has helped Israel become one of America's most trustworthy allies in the world. Now, I know there are a lot of people who worry now about whether the bipartisan American support for Israel is collapsing. And I want to speak to you honestly about that. In my opinion, it is not collapsing, but it is changing. And there are parts of the American political spectrum where support of Israel is clearly and ominously diminishing. I am by nature an optimist, not a pessimist. I'm not an alarmist, but amidst the continuing encouraging facts on the ground, I see storm clouds gathering in American politics. Overall, if you read public opinion polls in America, American public opinion continues to have a strong majority support for Israel. But if we look underneath those ultimate numbers, we see real attrition, particularly among liberals, Democrats, and younger people, so-called millennials. That must be taken seriously by all who care about Israel and about the U.S.-Israel relationship. Let me describe to you, to give you an example of what I'm talking about, some recent statements that really do alarm me. And they're recent. First, last week, two of the leading Democratic candidates for president, Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg, said they would consider withholding military aid to Israel if the Israeli government took steps that they thought were inconsistent with the two-state solution. Incidentally, this two-state solution that most Americans support. 2 days ago, Senator Bernie Sanders went further. He told a forum sponsored by J Street, and I quote, "If you want military aid, you're going to have to change fundamentally your relationship with the people of Gaza." In fact, I think it is fair to say that some of the $3.8 billion, that is in U.S. aid to Israel, should go right now to humanitarian aid in Gaza. What is most troubling about these statements is not just that they are challenging elements of Israeli policy. That's been happening in America for a long time. It is inherent in a free and open society like ours and in the relationship between two great democracies like the U.S. and Israel. The ominous and unprecedented factor here is American presidential candidates threatening to withhold American aid to Israel. That's something that shouldn't be done by the United States to a close ally like the State of Israel. And as often happens, here's what I fear, that these statements are a reflection of what the candidates are hearing among people who are going to vote in those primaries. Now, second and more personal is a column that appeared in last week's New York Jewish Week newspaper, written by a young man named Aaron Friedman. I don't know him. He describes himself as a millennial and a writer and journalist based in Brooklyn. The title of his op-ed says it all. Bernie Sanders is 78, but he represents American Jewry's future. Here's the concluding paragraph from his statement. "I once was a committed Zionist who attended Jewish day school. As a young kid, I remember my pride in helping my dad put up a Gore Lieberman campaign poster. But like many of my peers, I became alienated with the injustices I saw political elites perpetrate in the United States and Israel, and by American Jewish organizations' unwillingness to challenge them. Now, as a mostly secular, democratic socialist, I am glad to have a presidential candidate, Bernie Sanders, who is not just Jewish, but Jewish like me, and increasingly Jewish like most of us," end quote. Now, those are real 21st century American challenges to Herzl's Zionist vision, and I believe the place to begin our response to them is with Herzl. The truth is, among American Jews, there is a woeful ignorance of Theodor Herzl, his times and his work. Most American Jews now have grown up with the State of Israel as a reality. That's all they know. They probably know that the Holocaust preceded the establishment of the state, but I doubt that they know much or anything about the anti-Semitism in Europe that motivated Herzl's Zionism and the restoration of the state, and that has today reappeared in Europe and even in America. We need to teach these skeptics, people who are ill or uninformed, about Herzl, and ask them to read his writings and think about their timelessness, their relevance to today and tomorrow. And that's one reason why this first Zionist conference, this question of vision and reality, is so critical, and I hope will be followed by many more. Second, in Israel and among friends of Israel in America, we need to do a much better job of educating the rising generations that Israel is a vibrant, open, diverse, liberal society, whereas President Liberman said the rule of law governs, and I add, leaders are chosen in elections, even though these elections may sometimes take a while to reach a conclusion. Here's a final point about what we should do. I suggest respectfully, because I'm a Zionist but really a visitor, I hope that Israelis in this time, as they think about changes in public attitude in the United States, will ask themselves how Israel can act, how Israel can or wants to change to respond to some of its critics. And I would say that a very good place to start that process is with a look back and reconsideration of some of the as yet unrealized parts of Herzl's vision as stated in Alt Nile land. A final lesson for Herzl, which is between you and me. I have compared him twice to Nachshon. In fact, if you look at his life, the fact that he became the Nachshon of modern Jewish history could not have been predicted. In some ways, this is reassuring because it reminds us that each of us can become a Nachshon. And really, in our time, we must. It is up to us, each of us who are Israelis or care about Israel, to do what Herzl did in response to the anti-Semitism of his time as we face the anti-Semitism and Zionism of our time, and that is to stand up proudly, speak out, write, organize, and advocate. Of course, the big difference between Herzl's time and ours, thank God, is that Israel exists. But miracles like Israel are not self-sustaining. They need continued human support, and a little divine involvement wouldn't hurt either. So I ask you at the end, and it's a question we really should ask each other every day, can we keep Herzl's dream alive and well? Can we make the dream of Israel that he had better and better, stronger and stronger? And of course, he provides the answer. If we will it, it is no dream. Thank you very much.